On a frozen February morning in 1997, in the small farming community of Renville, Minnesota, a young woman named Jessica Nordstrom vanished from her home while her husband was supposedly out running errands. She was 28 years old, a part-time bookkeeper at the local grain elevator, mother to a 4-year-old daughter named Emma. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Her purse remained on the kitchen counter, her winter coat hung by the door. For nearly 2 decades, the question hung over that quiet town like the thick fog that rolls across the cornfields each autumn. What happened to Jessica Nordstrom? Renville sits in the western reaches of Minnesota, where the land flattens into endless stretches of farmland that reach toward the horizon in every direction. In February, the fields lie dormant under layers of snow and ice, and the wind cuts across the landscape with nothing to slow it down. The town itself housed barely 800 souls in 1997, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the Lutheran Church held potluck suppers every Wednesday, where the high school basketball games drew half the town on Friday nights. Main Street consisted of a single stoplight, a hardware store, a diner called Mabel's that served breakfast all day, and the Farmers State Bank, where Jessica's father had worked as a loan officer for 30 years. The Nordstroms lived on Maple Avenue, 3 blocks from Main Street, in a white 2-story house with green shutters, and a wraparound porch that Jessica had insisted on when they bought the place 5 years earlier. Michael Nordstrom, her husband, worked as a mechanic at Hanson's Auto Repair on the edge of town. He was 31, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands permanently stained with engine grease no matter how much he scrubbed them. Those who knew him said he was quiet, kept to himself mostly, spent his free time working on an old Chevrolet pickup in the garage. Jessica was his opposite in many ways. She volunteered at the library on Saturday mornings. She organized the Christmas pageant at church. She had a laugh that carried across rooms, warm and genuine. Their daughter Emma was 4 years old that winter, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's serious gray eyes. She attended preschool 3 mornings a week at the Methodist church basement, where she showed an unusual talent for drawing elaborate pictures of houses and trees and families holding hands under enormous suns. February 14th fell on a Friday that year, Valentine's Day. The temperature hovered around 12 degrees when the sun came up, and a fresh dusting of snow had fallen overnight, covering the streets in a thin white blanket that squeaked underfoot. Jessica woke early that morning, as she always did, just after 6. She made coffee in the kitchen while Michael showered upstairs. The house smelled of the cinnamon rolls she had prepared the night before, waiting in the refrigerator to be baked. She wore her favorite blue sweater, the soft one with the cable knit pattern and gray sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She had painted her nails the previous evening, a soft pink color, and they were still perfect, unchipped. Emma slept late that morning. No preschool on Fridays. Jessica had planned to take her to the library later after lunch, and then maybe to the park if the weather warmed up enough. Simple plans, ordinary plans, the kind that fill the spaces of a life. Michael came downstairs at 6:30, dressed in his work clothes, flannel shirt and jeans, heavy boots still wet from the previous day. He poured himself coffee, drank it standing at the counter. They spoke about mundane things. He mentioned he needed to pick up a part for the truck he was working on. She reminded him that her parents were coming for dinner on Sunday. He nodded, finished his coffee, rinsed the cup and left it in the sink. At 7:15, Michael Nordstrom walked out the front door, climbed into his Ford F-150 and drove away. Jessica stood at the kitchen window, watching his taillights disappear down Maple Avenue, heading toward Main Street. The neighbor across the street, Dorothy Chen, happened to be looking out her window at that exact moment. She would later remember thinking how cold it looked outside, how the bare trees seemed to shiver in the wind. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jessica Nordstrom alive. Michael claimed he drove straight to the auto parts store in Marshall, 23 miles east on Highway 19. Marshall was the nearest town of any size, with a population of 12,000, big enough to have a Walmart and a handful of chain restaurants. The auto parts store opened at 8. Michael said he arrived around 7:40, had to wait in his truck for the store to open, browsing through a catalog. He purchased a fuel pump for a 1989 Dodge Ram. The receipt showed a timestamp of 8:14. He said he stopped at the gas station next door, filled up his truck, bought a cup of coffee and a newspaper. Then he drove home, arriving back in Renville around 9:30. Emma woke sometime after 8. This detail would become important later. She came downstairs in her pajamas, the ones with the pink rabbits on them, and found the house empty. She was 4 years old, not quite old enough to understand the significance of being alone, but old enough to feel uneasy about it. She looked for her mother in every room. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. She called out, her small voice echoing through the quiet house. No answer came back. Clear's throat when Michael Nordstrom pulled into his driveway at approximately 9:30 that morning. He found Emma sitting on the stairs inside the front door, still in her pajamas, crying. He would later tell investigators that his first thought was that Jessica had run to the neighbor's house for something. He checked the kitchen. Her purse was there, next to her car keys. Her coat hung on the hook. Her boots sat on the mat by the door. He called her name. He walked through every room. The bed upstairs was made, the bathroom clean, towels folded on the rack. Everything in its place. He called Jessica's parents first. Harold and Margaret Heston lived 4 blocks away on Oak Street. They had not seen Jessica that morning. Margaret asked if something was wrong. Michael said he did not know, but Jessica was not home and Emma had been alone in the house. Harold said they would be right over. By 10 o'clock, a handful of people had gathered at the Nordstrom house. Jessica's parents, her younger sister Amanda, Dorothy Chen from across the street. They searched the basement, the garage, the backyard. The snow in the yard was undisturbed except for the path Michael's boots had made when he left that morning and returned. No footprints led away from the house. The back gate was latched from the inside. Harold Heston called the Renville County Sheriff's Department at 10:20. Deputy Brian Kowalski arrived 15 minutes later, driving slowly down Maple Avenue, his patrol car leaving fresh tracks in the snow. He was young, only 26, 2 years out of the academy. He had known Jessica Nordstrom most of his life. They had been in the same grade in school, though they ran in different circles. He parked in front of the house, adjusted his hat, and walked up the front steps with a growing sense that something was very wrong. The search began in earnest by noon. Sheriff Thomas Brennan called in every available deputy. Volunteers assembled at the high school parking lot. By 2 in the afternoon, more than 100 people had spread out across Renville, searching every alley, every shed, every basement. The temperature had climbed to 18 degrees, but the wind made it feel far colder. The searchers moved through yards and checked abandoned buildings and walked the ditches along every road leading out of town. They found nothing. Part 2. The investigation, the official search operation, expanded over the following days with methodical precision. Sheriff Brennan contacted the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension on Saturday morning, requesting assistance from their investigative unit. Special Agent Laura Martinez arrived from St. Paul on Saturday afternoon, a 15-year veteran with experience in missing persons cases. She set up a command center in the Renville Community Center, transforming the main hall where the weekly bingo games were held into an investigation, headquarters with phones, maps, and timeline charts covering the walls. The scope of the search grew exponentially. Volunteers came from surrounding towns. Church groups organized meal rotations to feed the searchers. The National Guard sent a helicopter that flew low over the frozen fields, looking for any disturbance in the snow, any sign of movement or color that did not belong. Divers from the state police checked the Ramsey Creek where it ran along the southern edge of town, though the water was frozen solid and the ice showed no breaks. Those who knew Jessica described her as responsible, devoted to her daughter, not the type to simply walk away. Her sister Amanda told investigators that Jessica had seemed happy lately, excited about spring, making plans to plant a vegetable garden in the backyard. Her father Harold mentioned that Jessica had called him on Wednesday evening to discuss refinancing their mortgage, talking about interest rates and payment schedules. Hardly the conversation of someone planning to disappear. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Mabel's Diner became an unofficial gathering place where people traded information and theories over endless cups of coffee. The local newspaper, the Renville Reporter, ran Jessica's photograph on the front page every day for 2 weeks. Someone organized a candlelight vigil at the Methodist Church on the Tuesday following her disappearance. More than 300 people attended, standing in the cold with flickering candles cupped in their gloved hands, singing hymns into the frozen night. But as the days passed, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Deputy Kowalski noted in his initial report that Michael Nordstrom had seemed unusually calm when he first arrived at the house. Not panicked, not frantic, calm. He had answered questions in a flat, measured tone, providing information without emotion. When asked if he and Jessica had been having any problems, Michael said no, everything was fine, they were happy. But Harold Heston pulled Deputy Kowalski aside later that first day and mentioned, quietly, that Jessica had seemed troubled recently, though she would not say why when her father asked. Special Agent Martinez began reconstructing the timeline with painstaking attention to detail. Michael Nordstrom said he left the house at 7:15. Dorothy Chen confirmed seeing his truck drive away at approximately that time. The drive from Renville to Marshall took roughly 25 to 30 minutes in good weather. Michael said he arrived at the auto parts store around 7:40 and waited for it to open at 8. The purchase receipt showed 8:14. The gas station receipt showed 8:27. Then the drive home, arriving at 9:30. The math worked. Barely. But Martinez noticed something peculiar when she examined Michael's truck. The odometer showed he had driven 52 miles since his last oil change 2 weeks earlier. The round trip to Marshall and back was 46 miles. Where were the other 6 miles? When Martinez asked Michael about this, he paused, thought for a moment, then said he must have driven around town a few times after returning home, looking for Jessica, though he had not mentioned this before. Physical evidence was frustratingly scarce. No signs of struggle in the house, no blood, no broken furniture or disheveled rooms. The doors had been locked when Michael returned home, he said, both the front and back doors secured as they always were. Jessica's fingerprints were everywhere, of course. It was her house. But there were no unidentified prints, no foreign DNA, nothing to suggest an intruder had entered the home. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about Michael's demeanor. He had not cried during the first 3 days. He answered questions with a strange detachment, as if discussing someone else's problem. When Emma asked where Mommy was, Michael told her that Mommy had gone away for a while, offering no further explanation, no comfort, no reassurance that she would return. Harold and Margaret Heston took Emma home with them on the 3rd day, unable to watch their granddaughter wandering through that empty house looking for her mother. Special Agent Martinez interviewed Michael extensively on the 5th day after Jessica's disappearance. They sat in a small office at the sheriff's department, a tape recorder running on the desk between them. She asked him to walk through the morning again, minute by minute. Michael complied, his voice steady, recounting the same details he had provided before. Coffee, conversation, leaving at 7:15, the auto parts store, coming home to find Emma crying on the stairs. Martinez asked about his marriage. Michael said it was good, no problems, no arguments, no financial stress, no affairs on either side. When Martinez pressed him, asking if he was certain, absolutely certain that everything was fine, Michael met her eyes and said yes, he was certain. But his right hand, resting on his knee, had formed a fist, knuckles white with tension. On the 10th day, a farmer named Carl Iverson called the sheriff's department to report something odd. His property lay 3 miles west of Renville, a sprawling section of corn and soybean fields that stretched for nearly a quarter mile on each side of County Road 7. He had been driving his tractor along the southern edge of his property when he noticed tire tracks leading off the road into a harvested corn field, cutting deep ruts through the snow. The tracks led about 50 yards into the field, then stopped, turned around, came back. Carl said he would not have thought anything of it except the tracks looked fresh, maybe a week old, and he could not think of any reason someone would drive into that field in the middle of winter. Deputies followed up immediately. They photographed the tire tracks, took measurements, made plaster casts of the clearest impressions. The tread pattern matched common all-season tires, the kind found on thousands of vehicles. But the wheelbase measurements were consistent with a full-size pickup truck. Michael Nordstrom drove a full-size pickup truck. When confronted with this information, Michael said he had never been on Carl Iverson's property, had no reason to drive into that field, did not know why his truck's tire measurements would match the tracks. Martinez asked if anyone else drove his truck. Michael said no, only him. She asked if he was certain he had not driven down County Road 7 on the morning of February 14th or any morning that week. Michael said he was certain. He had driven to Marshall on Highway 19, straight east, not west on County Road 7. But Highway 19 and County Road 7 intersected just outside of town, and County Road 7 would add approximately 6 miles to a round trip that ended in an empty field 3 miles from town. The investigation intensified. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search Carl Iverson's property. They worked methodically through the frozen field where the tire tracks had been found, their handlers watching for any alert, any indication of human remains. The dogs found nothing. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan beneath the snow and frozen earth. Nothing. If something had been buried there, it was buried deep, or the dogs were simply in the wrong location. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the slow erosion of certainty, the investigation into Jessica Nordstrom's disappearance became a study in accumulating suspicions. Michael hired an attorney on the 14th day, a decision that shocked the community. Why would an innocent man need a lawyer? Michael's answer, delivered through his attorney, was that he needed to protect himself from unfair accusations. He stopped speaking to investigators voluntarily. He stopped attending the community searches. He stayed in his house with the curtains drawn, not answering the door when reporters knocked. The media attention grew intense. Local television stations from Minneapolis sent reporters and camera crews. The story appeared on regional news broadcasts, then national morning shows. Jessica's parents gave interviews, pleading for information, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. Michael declined all interview requests. His silence became its own kind of testimony. By March, 6 weeks after Jessica's disappearance, the investigation had reached an impasse. Every lead had been followed. Every tip had been investigated. The tire tracks in Carl Iverson's field remained unexplained, but proved nothing concrete. The odometer discrepancy remained unexplained, but proved nothing concrete. Michael's unusual composure remained troubling, but proved nothing concrete. Without a body, without physical evidence, without witnesses, the case began to go cold despite everyone's best efforts. Special Agent Martinez returned to St. Paul in late March, leaving behind boxes of reports and photographs and witness statements that filled an entire evidence room. Sheriff Brennan continued to work the case, but other crimes demanded attention, other emergencies required response. The volunteers stopped searching, the reporters stopped calling. Life in Renville slowly, reluctantly, returned to something resembling normal. But the question remained, whispered over grocery store checkout counters and church pews and dinner tables. What happened to Jessica Nordstrom? Part 3. The silence. 18 months passed. Then 2 years. Then 5. The The calendar turned from 1997 to 1998 to 1999, approaching the new millennium, and still Jessica Nordstrom remained missing. The case file sat in the Renville County Sheriff's Department, periodically reviewed but yielding no new leads. The White House with green shutters on Maple Avenue stood empty for 3 months before Michael finally moved out, relocating to a rental apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. He continued working at Hanson's Auto Repair, though some customers began taking their vehicles elsewhere, unwilling to trust a man who might have done something unspeakable. Emma Nordstrom grew up in her grandparents' house on Oak Street. Harold and Margaret Heston were granted temporary custody, then permanent custody when Michael did not contest the arrangement. He visited Emma every other weekend, awkward visits where they sat in the living room while Margaret watched from the kitchen, unable to leave them alone together, unable to fully trust. Emma barely remembered her mother by the time she turned 7. The memories that remained were fragments, disconnected images. A soft blue sweater, a particular laugh, the smell of cinnamon rolls baking. Sometimes she drew pictures at school, always houses with smoking chimneys and families standing in front yards. The teacher noticed that Emma's families always consisted of 3 figures, never 4. The psychological weight of those years left marks that would take decades to fully understand. Michael became increasingly isolated, speaking only when necessary, eating dinner alone at Mabel's diner where the conversations would stop when he walked in. He sold the house on Maple Avenue in 2000, accepting an offer far below market value just to be done with it. A young couple from Minneapolis bought it, unaware of its history, though they learned soon enough when neighbors mentioned it in passing. They painted the exterior gray and planted new shrubs, trying to erase the past through renovation. Harold Heston retired from the bank in 1999, unable to concentrate on interest rates and loan applications when his daughter remained missing, her fate unknown. He spent his days maintaining a website dedicated to Jessica's case, updating it with any new information, posting photographs and timeline details and theories. He corresponded with other families of missing persons, joining support groups and attending conferences. Margaret volunteered at the church 6 days a week, throwing herself into service, baking casseroles for funeral receptions and organizing the food pantry. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. Emma showed signs of the trauma in small, revealing ways. She refused to sleep with her bedroom door closed. She insisted on keeping a nightlight on until she was 13 years old. She developed an intense fear of being alone, panicking if her grandparents left her for even short periods. The school counselor noted behavioral issues in 3rd grade: difficulty concentrating, emotional outbursts, reluctance to engage with other children. By middle school, Emma had learned to mask these struggles, becoming quiet and withdrawn, keeping people at arm's length. Clear's throat, the relationship between Michael and Emma deteriorated steadily. The weekend visits grew less frequent, then stopped altogether when Emma turned 10 and refused to go. Michael did not fight it. He paid child support regularly, sent birthday cards that Emma never opened, maintained distance that seemed to suit everyone involved. Those who saw him around town noted how he had aged dramatically, his hair turning gray in his 30s, his shoulders permanently hunched as if carrying invisible weight. In 2003, 6 years after Jessica's disappearance, Michael began dating a woman named Patricia Simmons who worked as a waitress at the truck stop outside Marshall. She knew his history. Everyone knew his history. But Patricia had her own complicated past, her own reasons for accepting damaged goods, and they moved in together after 3 months. The relationship was rocky from the start. Patricia would later tell investigators that Michael talked in his sleep, fragments of sentences that made no sense, names and apologies and desperate pleas. Once she woke to find him sitting on the edge of the bed at 3 in the morning, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. When she asked what was wrong, he said nothing, just a bad dream, go back to sleep. They married in 2004 in a brief ceremony at the courthouse with no family present. Patricia became pregnant that same year. She gave birth to a son in January 2005, a boy they named Lucas. For a brief period, it seemed Michael might have found a way forward, a chance at a normal life. He was attentive during the pregnancy, present at the birth, gentle with the baby. But something shifted after Lucas came home from the hospital. Michael withdrew again, spending long hours in the garage working on vehicles that did not need repair, avoiding the house, avoiding his wife, avoiding the crying infant who required constant attention. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have watched their facade crack slowly over time, Patricia's experience during those years revealed the cost of living with unspoken truth. She told her sister that Michael would disappear sometimes, leaving the house at odd hours with no explanation, returning hours later with dirt on his boots and an unwillingness to say where he had been. She mentioned that he kept the door to the basement locked, claiming he stored tools down there that were dangerous for children, though Lucas was just an infant. She noticed that Michael tensed whenever the local news mentioned Jessica's case, which still received occasional coverage on anniversaries of her disappearance. The breaking point came in the summer of 2006. Patricia found a box hidden in the back of Michael's closet, pushed behind winter coats and old boots. Inside were photographs of Jessica, dozens of them, some that Patricia recognized from news coverage but others she had never seen before. Casual snapshots, Jessica smiling at the camera, Jessica holding baby Emma, Jessica in her wedding dress, but also photographs that seemed wrong somehow, Jessica sleeping, Jessica getting dressed, seemingly unaware of the camera. Photographs taken from odd angles, through doorways, as if the photographer had been hiding. When Patricia confronted Michael about the photographs, he became angry in a way she had never seen before. Not loud anger, cold anger, the kind that makes the air feel thin and dangerous. He told her to put the box back, to never touch his things again, to mind her own business. When she pushed further, demanding to know why he kept those particular photographs, especially the ones that seemed invasive and wrong, Michael's face went blank. He walked out of the house, climbed into his truck and drove away. He did not come back for 3 days. Patricia called the sheriff's department. She spoke with a deputy who had not been involved in the original investigation, a young woman who took notes, but seemed uncertain what to do with this information. The deputy said she would pass it along to the appropriate people. Nothing happened for 2 weeks. Then Special Agent Laura Martinez, who had been promoted and now worked major crimes out of Minneapolis, received a call from the Renville County Sheriff's Department about Patricia Nordstrom's concerns. Martinez drove to Renville on a Wednesday morning in August 2006, nearly 10 years after Jessica's disappearance. She met Patricia at a coffee shop in Marshall, away from Renville, away from prying eyes and small-town gossip. Patricia brought the box of photographs. Martinez went through them slowly, examining each image, noting the angles and lighting and the expression on Jessica's face, that faint unease visible in some of the pictures, as if she knew something was not right, but could not articulate what. The photographs alone proved nothing. A husband keeping photos of his missing wife could be explained as grief, as nostalgia, as an inability to let go. But Martinez had worked enough cases to recognize obsession when she saw it. She asked Patricia about Michael's behavior, his habits, his moods. Patricia spoke for 2 hours, describing the sleepless nights, the disappearances, the locked basement, the explosive anger. She admitted she was afraid, though she could not explain exactly what she feared. Just a feeling, she said. A sense that something terrible lived inside her husband, buried deep, waiting. Martinez reopened Jessica Nordstrom's case file. She reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes, nearly a decade of investigative experience now shaping how she interpreted the information. The tire tracks in Carl Iverson's field, the 6 unexplained miles on Michael's odometer, the timing that barely worked, the complete absence of physical evidence, which in itself was evidence of something, Guilty people clean up. Innocent people do not think to clean up because there is nothing to clean. Emma Nordstrom was 14 years old in 2006, old enough now to remember more than fragments, old enough to carry questions that had accumulated over years. Her grandparents had sheltered her from much of the speculation surrounding her father, but Emma was not naive. She heard whispers at school. She saw the way people looked at her, a mix of pity and curiosity. She had learned to introduce herself by her mother's maiden name, Emma Heston, avoiding the connection to Michael Nordstrom, though everyone knew anyway. Small towns do not forget. That fall, Emma began seeing a therapist, a psychologist named Dr. Sarah Chen who specialized in childhood trauma. The sessions were difficult at first. Emma had spent years building walls around the memories of her mother's disappearance, protecting herself from pain by refusing to examine it too closely. But Dr. Chen was patient, creating a space where Emma could explore those memories without judgment, without pressure. Slowly, over weeks and months, fragments began to emerge. Emma remembered waking up that morning, Valentine's Day. She remembered the cold house, the empty kitchen. She remembered calling for her mother and receiving no answer. But there was something else, something that lived at the edge of memory, just out of reach. Dr. Chen did not push. She let Emma move at her own pace, understanding that recovered memories could be unreliable, that the mind sometimes creates narratives to explain trauma. But she also knew that children see things adults miss, that a 4-year-old processing her world has a clarity unclouded by preconception. In November 2006, during a session 3 months into therapy, Emma said something that made Dr. Chen sit forward in her chair. They had been talking about the morning her mother disappeared, walking through the memories step by step. Emma described waking up, coming downstairs, looking for her mother. Then she paused, her face troubled as if seeing something for the first time. "I remember a smell," Emma said quietly, "like smoke, but not wood smoke, something else. Chemical." Dr. Chen asked her to describe the smell more. Emma struggled to find words. She said it reminded her of the smell at her grandfather's farm, the shed where they stored gasoline for the tractor. Petroleum, engine exhaust, that kind of smell hanging in the house, faint but noticeable. "Did your father's truck smell like that?" Dr. Chen asked. Emma shook her head. "It was inside. In the house." Dr. Chen noted this detail in her case file and contacted Special Agent Martinez that same day. Part 4. The revelation. Martinez met with Emma and Dr. Chen in December 2006. They spoke in Dr. Chen's office, a comfortable room with soft lighting and shelves full of books and toys used in play therapy. Emma was 14, small for her age, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. She sat on the couch next to her grandmother Margaret, nervous but determined. Martinez explained that she was investigating her mother's disappearance again, looking at everything with new attention. She said that anything Emma remembered, no matter how small or strange it seemed, might be important. Emma repeated what she had told Dr. Chen about the smell. Martinez asked follow-up questions. What time had Emma woken up? Sometime after 8, she thought, but she could not be certain. Where in the house was the smell strongest? She remembered noticing it in the kitchen, near the door to the garage. How long did the smell last? She did not know. By the time her father came home, she could not remember smelling it anymore, but maybe that was because she had been crying, or because she had gotten used to it. Martinez returned to the evidence files with this new information. If Emma had woken to find the house empty and smelling of petroleum or exhaust, it suggested several possibilities. Had someone started a vehicle inside the attached garage? The garage door would have been closed in February, keeping out the cold. Running a vehicle in an enclosed space would fill both the garage and potentially the house with carbon monoxide and exhaust fumes. But why would anyone do that? Clear's throat, the answer when it came to Martinez, was sickeningly obvious. Because the person running that vehicle had already placed something in the vehicle, something they needed to transport away from the house without being seen. something they could not carry by hand, something wrapped in plastic or sealed in containers that would not leak, a body, for instance, or parts of a body. Martinez obtained a search warrant for Michael Nordstrom's residence in January 2007. He was still living above the hardware store, Patricia and Lucas having left him 6 months earlier when Patricia finally acknowledged what she had suspected for years, that her husband had done something terrible, and that living with him placed her and her son in danger. The search of Michael's apartment yielded little of immediate value: clothing, tools, miscellaneous personal effects. But in a storage unit Michael rented on the edge of Marshall, investigators found the old Chevrolet pickup he had been restoring in 1997, the one he kept in the garage of the house on Maple Avenue. The truck was torn apart bolt by bolt. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood in the truck bed, despite obvious attempts to clean it. DNA analysis took 3 months, but the results were conclusive. The blood belonged to Jessica Nordstrom. Soil samples taken from the truck bed's corroded corners contained pollen and sediment, consistent with samples taken from Carl Iverson's field, the location where the mysterious tire tracks had been found in February 1997, 3 miles west of Renville. Michael Nordstrom was arrested on April 3, 2007, 10 years and 7 weeks after his wife's disappearance. Sheriff's deputies arrived at Hanson's Auto Repair at 11 in the morning, finding Michael underneath a Jeep Cherokee, replacing a transmission. They read him his rights in the parking lot while a crowd gathered. Michael's face showed no surprise. He did not ask what he was being charged with. He simply nodded, placed his hands behind his back, and allowed himself to be handcuffed without resistance. The arrest made national news. Cable networks ran segments about the cold case finally cracking, about the husband who had maintained his innocence for a decade, about the daughter whose memories had helped break the case. Harold and Margaret Heston gave a brief statement outside their home, thanking the investigators for their persistence. Emma did not speak to reporters. She watched the coverage from her grandparents' living room, seeing footage of her father being led into the county jail, and felt nothing. Or perhaps she felt everything, too much to process, a tsunami of emotions that left her numb and exhausted. The prosecution, led by Assistant County Attorney David Walsh, built their case methodically over the following months. They could not produce Jessica's body. Despite extensive searches of Carl Iverson's property and surrounding areas, her remains were never recovered. But they had the blood in the truck bed. They had the tire tracks linking Michael's vehicle to the field. They had the odometer evidence. They had Patricia's testimony about the photographs and Michael's disturbing behavior. They had Emma's recovered memory of the smell in the house. And they had Michael's inconsistent statements from 1997, the small lies that had accumulated into a mountain of reasonable doubt about his innocence. The defense, led by a public defender named James Thornton, argued circumstantial evidence. They claimed the blood could have come from any number of innocent sources. Jessica could have cut herself helping Michael with the truck months before her disappearance. The tire tracks proved only that someone driving a similar vehicle had entered that field, not that Michael had done so. The odometer discrepancy was explainable by imperfect record-keeping. Patricia was a scorned wife with an agenda. Emma's recovered memory was unreliable, the product of therapeutic suggestion and a child's desire to make sense of trauma. The trial began in September 2008, held in the Renville County Courthouse, a limestone building constructed in 1923 with high ceilings and creaking wooden floors. More than 300 people applied for the 40 available seats in the gallery. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses testified about Jessica's character, Michael's behavior, the investigation's findings. Special Agent Martinez spent 2 full days on the stand, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every timeline reconstruction, every logical inference that led to one conclusion. Michael Nordstrom had ended his wife's life in their home on the morning of February 14, 1997. then transported her remains to an unknown location, most likely Carl Iverson's field, where he buried her deep enough that cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar could not locate her. Michael did not testify. His attorney advised against it, knowing that prosecutors would tear apart his story, expose every contradiction, force him to explain the unexplainable. So Michael sat silent at the defense table, wearing a suit that did not fit quite right, his face expressionless, watching witness after witness describe his actions and inactions, painting a portrait of a man capable of terrible things. Emma Nordstrom testified on the 11th day of trial. She was 16 years old, sitting in the witness box in a dark blue dress her grandmother had bought for the occasion. Prosecutor Walsh asked her to describe the morning her mother disappeared. Emma's voice was steady as she recounted waking up alone, searching the house, the fear that had gripped her. When Walsh asked about the smell, Emma closed her eyes for a moment, as if experiencing it again. "It smelled like exhaust," she said, "like the truck had been running in the garage." On cross-examination, James Thornton tried to undermine her testimony. He asked how Emma could be certain of a smell from 11 years ago. She said she could not be absolutely certain, but it was her memory, and it had been strong enough that when it surfaced in therapy, she knew it was real. Thornton suggested that Dr. Chen had planted the memory. Emma shook her head firmly. "Nobody planted anything," she said. "I remembered it because it was there, because it happened." The jury deliberated for 2 days. On September 29, 2008, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all charges. Michael Nordstrom was convicted of first-degree intentional ending of life and tampering with physical evidence. He received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the judge read the sentence, Michael's face remained blank. He did not react. He simply stood when instructed, turned when instructed, and allowed himself to be led from the courtroom. Those who believed in his innocence, and there were a handful even after the conviction, maintained that justice had failed. They pointed to the lack of a body, the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the possibility that Jessica had met some other fate. But those who had doubted Michael from the beginning, who had watched his strange behavior in the days after Jessica's disappearance, felt this response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. Hit continued to nudge Claude along.